incredibly interested in today's show.
We're live, and
the glass.
We're talking about Louis, and we're live.
Oh, hey everybody!
It's the Mindstate Marketing Hour, where everything's a surprise. Sometimes we're excited to be here today. We got a little special news. We got a special guest, but this is where we learn how to use science to connect with your clients. And I'm going to roll this nice little thing. We got dope beats going on here. It's the Mindstate Marketing Hour with Will Leach. He's our favorite scientist who doesn't wear a white cloak. We're interviewing Hunter Thurman. That's right, Alpha Diver.
Welcome everybody to the show. Welcome, Hunter. It's good to see you again. Yeah, we have some news. Steve, we have some big news that we're going to release on the show today.
It's crazy. It's happened. We set off on a journey, Will, and we stumbled along.
We did.
Two guys trying to figure out how to do a live stream, talk about something that's interesting. I think that's interesting. And you have some news that we just learned.
I do. So I want to let everybody know that we have been picked up by Sirius XM Radio. Howard Stern is now being taken off the channel. And the Mindstate Marketing Hour is going to be rolling 24 hours a day. No, that didn't happen this time.
Oh.
No, it didn't. Hey, so guys, a couple of weeks ago on the show, we talked about that we were nominated for Marketing Research of the Year, Marketing Research Podcast of the Year, and I have an envelope in my hand, and the winner was announced 2 days ago, and it's the Mindstate Marketing Hour. We are the legit 2002 Podcast of the Year for the marketing research industry. Steve, it is an honor to work with you. You've done great things. You play dope beats. You take the conversations into better directions than I can. Thank you for being a part of the show. You guys out there who voted for us, I thank you for that. It matters. Your likes matter. Your comments matter. And we were at least acknowledged 2 days ago at the IIEX Behavior as being the podcast of the year. So thank you so much, everybody, for doing that. We're real excited. Really, really excited.
That's awesome. I'm proud of you, Will, that you as a science, you should have to be dignified and you have to share your insight, but you get on here and you talk about real stuff. And so as the producer, as the co-host, I'm proud to be associated with you as a scientist.
Good. Many, many more things to come. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. And it's a really big event because not only did we win Marketing Research Podcast of the Year and maybe the decade, and we're not sure, we're still waiting for those results to come in. We have Hunter Thurman, the president of Alpha Diver. I'm going to give you a really quick background on Hunter. Hunter, I hope you're going to talk a little bit more. First, I want to talk about quickly how I met Hunter.
Yeah.
So I met Hunter, and you may even know more of the details, Hunter. I certainly remember walking at a conference by myself. It has to be a decade ago now. It has to be a decade ago, more maybe. And I was walking around a conference and I was looking at marketing research companies, and I kept going. I was like, who's doing what I do? Like, who knows anything about behavioral science? And I kept going to each one, and I wasn't feeling really good. And in fact, I started getting nervous, Steve, because I was thinking, I'm in an industry where nobody knows anything about behavioral science. I'm trying to build a business. This might not be maybe I should go back to PepsiCo. And one of the last tables I went to was Hunter's table. And I think, Hunter, you may have been just at the table by yourself. I'm pretty sure you were at the time.
Yeah.
And I went to your table and I saw your book. And then you and I got into a conversation. And honestly, I walked away going, like, I wrote your name down. I was like, I cannot believe there's other people in the world that know these sciences, that they're passionate about these sciences and bringing behavioral science and neuroscience to business. Honestly, I was really, really excited. It gave me hope, Hunter, because I just started my company maybe a year before, and I was nervous, man. And so when I saw you there and you had a table and I didn't have a table, I thought to myself, there's hope for the company. And 10 years later, I'm doing my thing and you're doing your thing. So Hunter, for those of you who don't know, he's the president of Alpha Diver. It's a marketing research and consulting firm, and it applies neuroscience to really deeply understand marketplace behavior. Neuroscientists and behavioral scientists at heart. He works with leading brands. We've actually competed on projects against each other, and he's won a few. I think probably I've won a few, but we've actually worked together as well. on just trying to make the marketplace better using these behavioral science principles, neuroscience. And so right now, even Hunter is even expanding his leadership roles into even the Wall Street analyst community, doing some amazing things, helping, financial analysts and Wall Street try to understand what's going on in the marketplace. So Hunter is an amazing thought leader in our industry. I'm so glad that he decided to join us on the Mindstate Marketing Hour. Hunter, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. I was booked on Howard Stern this morning. It's coincidence you say that, but when I heard the news, I dropped it right away. I said, okay.
Smart move. Smart move. Get that bum out of there. Yeah.
No, it's funny. I remember that. I was talking with Steve backstage before we got started. I remember that so well too. And it's like, it's so many times we've had this discussion where we're living parallel lives, and that conference was a great example of one. So yeah, it's been great to collaborate over the years. So thanks for having me.
Good. Well, a lot of people know a lot about Howard Stern, and they know a lot about us, but they don't necessarily know a lot about you. Hey, Ryan Boyle. Good to see you. Yep. You'll have to explain the Ryan Boyle, that he knows you. Yep. Hey, tell me a little bit about what's your story? Like, where did you grow up? Like, what kind of guy were you growing up?
Yeah.
And where and how in the world did you end up where you're in this profession now around neuroscience? It's not for everybody.
No, it's, and market research is often, I think more and more there's like, degrees you can get. But back then it was sort of like you sort of found your way into the industry. So I grew up in Santa Fe. I live in Cincinnati now. We're based in Cincinnati, but I grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which a lot of people don't realize is way up in the mountains. So, I kind of grew up as like a mountain kid. I would snowboard and fly fish and play soccer and be out in the woods and stuff. And academically, I was interested in, I kind of never reflected on this until I was thinking about it the other day, when we were chatting, but my favorite topics were creative writing, and then what was called studio art history, which was like sculpting and like making stuff based on historical, themes and stuff. And, so at first I thought I want to be a journalist because I really liked writing. I kind of found that was maybe too much writing. I kind of liked the investigative side. So then for a minute I was like, well, maybe I'll do art and things like that. I ended up getting a business degree at Miami University in marketing, which, I guess as I look back in my mind, in my, totally uninformed mind, sort of, I thought split the difference between kind of writing and storytelling and kind of art and creation. So I thought, well, this will be great. I'll go work at an ad agency, which I did. And that agency had a consulting arm. And at that time it was innovation consulting arm. And I very quickly found that kind of the ad campaign cycle and all that was a lot less engaging to me than the insights, and I didn't really know about like market research. I thought working at an ad agency meant you could make funny ads, which is what I thought I'd go to. I very quickly learned, we try to understand what people are doing and communicate to that. And that was the side where I had passion. So I started into the inside industry, over 20 years ago, and got to kind of this point around the time you mentioned, I was probably 6 months ahead of you. That's why I had a table.
Yeah, that's right.
Tablecloth, everything, where I became very dissatisfied. It was like, look, I can't really explain how we're doing this. I can't really explain why our methodology at that time, it was all about digital, mobile. It's like, if you're doing research on a mobile device, surely it's the greatest thing ever. But it was sort of, if I was being honest, we were kind of making it up as we went. And it was very dissatisfying to me. So that's what brought me into the neuro space and brought me to explore this, what is this side of the world? At that time, I would have called it psychology, have to offer. I think you probably had a similar background, right, Will?
Very much so. Yeah, it was. In fact, that's exactly the same story. I was looking at ad testing scores at PepsiCo. Didn't make sense on what I was reading and in market results. And because of that, I started studying behavioral science. And the whole story of mine was that an experiment went wrong, and I had basically a year before I was going to get fired. I knew I was going to get fired if I didn't understand how to understand how marketing works. And so I dove into behavioral sciences, and similar to you, I fell in love with it. Couldn't stop thinking about it. Yeah. 10 years later, I got a company.
That's cool. That's really cool.
So let's help me out. I'm not the scientist here in the room. And what's the difference between neuro and behavioral science?
Yeah. So I thought I'd be doing psychology. And through a mutual friend, she said, look, you should meet this guy, T. Siggy Hale, PhD, who we know as Siggy. He was running a lab. He's a neuroscientist. He was running a lab at UCLA. And I was like, I kind of thought neuroscience was more like neurosurgery, brain surgery, more physiological, more like the parts and, components of the brain, which there is an element of that. But, long story short, I think he and I both kind of took this call like, okay. And I started talking to him and he kind of goes, so what do you do? And I said, market research. We try to help these, mostly big companies figure out what tensions people have, why they do things. And he's like, really? Companies like want to know that? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, and they pay money for it? I'm like, yeah, they do.
A lot of money.
And I'm kind of like, what do you do? And he's like, well, I run this lab, at UCLA, and we try to figure out why people do what they do. And he was studying a lot of like ADHD and attentional type things at the time. And as the more and more I described what we were doing, I said, the holy grail for our industry is, can we figure out why people are doing things, what actually underlies their behavior? And he goes, well, we know why they do things. I mean, we're not, human beings aren't that big a mystery. We know why. And I was like, what? And so from there, this great partnership resulted, and he's been with me ever since. But to answer your question on neuro, what I've learned is neuroscientists are like massive data wonks. I mean, they're so far into like SPSS and deep analyses. It was shocking to me. I mean, that they use that much big data. And so in our world, the neuro side of it is really how we measure and assess and diagnose behavior. The psychology side, or the applied psychology side, is then interpreting that into activation. So what should we go do? What should you put on Instagram such that it will impact behavior? That's how I think, I look at kind of the two sides of it. Will, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I used to, and this isn't exactly scientific, but so I took my lab coat off, but I used to think of it like this, and it's an easy way of explaining it. I used to say that I think about it more in neuromarketing versus behavioral marketing, behavioral psychology marketing. I'd say neuromarketing is focused on that first and critical 1/20th of a second, where when something pops up, what is my neurological reaction to something? Do I have an avoidance response? Is there any kind of saliency issues?
Yeah.
I look at it in that direction, because if I don't nail neuro correctly, it doesn't matter how much psychology I have in the ad, people are already kind of moving and wandering. So the behavioral psychology gets to, once I have the neurological response that's positive, I want to learn more about what I'm seeing, even if there isn't actually cognition, then psychology comes in. And so I used to talk about neuro is the first 1 second.
Yeah.
1 second on is psychology. And that's a very rough way of explaining the two. So in my world. So let me ask you, Hunter, then. So Alpha Diver, where do you sit? Because you may not see that distinctions all together, maybe. And for you, but how does Alpha Diver think about the world?
The Alpha Diva.
I've got this weird accent, and now that I'm an award-winning podcaster, Steve, I have like this new accent that keeps coming out. Did you hear that?
Yes, I did, love. Yes.
I'm taking that. No, I totally agree with that. I mean, we talk a lot about, between the ears, and certainly psychology is between the ears, but it sort of gets out into the real world more. So I think you're spot on. I mean, what we're doing is measure, and what really, Siggy and team have led us to do is measuring these deep psychological drivers. So those kind of first second, those first moment of truth, as they coined it at P&G decades ago, those first bits of cognition, how do you get someone's attention, how you create meaning, what their brain is tuned to recognize and process. We're able to measure those things at a really quantitative level. And so that's still pretty unique out in the world. And then once we have profiled, and that's kind of that first second stuff, we go, look, you're dealing with kind of 2 brains or 3 brains out in the world. Then we are also measuring a lot about what ways of shopping and which retailers they're engaged with and which media, like mostly digital media, align with their psychology. And that's how then we can get into that kind of second, 90% of the equation, as you outlined it, of how do you impact it? How do you reach them out in the real world? And that really is at the core of what we're doing. We've been building this database over the past, 5 years that we're continually using for baseline and database norms and things like that. So that's the instrument that we've evolved to in our 11 years doing this.
So the three brains, you mentioned we're dealing with three brains. Talk more about that.
Yeah, well, there's really, and this is one of the things. So when Siggy goes, we know why people do what they do. There are four main drivers that predictably will explain people's behavior. And the best analogy, or the best example rather, for me is Facebook. Go onto Facebook and look at your Facebook feed. I know that's kind of a boomer thing to say. Maybe Instagram.
My phone. What do you want me to do?
It's like, if you have a smartphone, you can access Facebook. But go onto Facebook. There's four reasons people be on Facebook: to learn, to get recipes, to acquire information, to connect with their tribe, which is like the ostensible purpose of social media, and some people are there for that. To take a little vacation, to watch fail videos, to surf around and just kind of give their brain a break, or to brag, to show off, to conspicuously consume. And those four drivers are present in any category, in any context. Everyone thinks that we behave really rationally, but Will and I, that's the thesis of our careers. Sometimes that's the case when I'm doing my taxes. Yeah, I guess. But even in contexts like that, even in like contexts of like health insurance, we find that those other three, social, the experiential, or what we call the instinctual, the kind of like showing off and bragging, are far more explanatory of people's behavior. But that we as humans don't have access to that. We can't, even if we weren't embarrassed in a focus group, for example, which we used to do, we don't even recognize it in our own behavior. So there's all sorts of reasons that traditional means of research overlook those. But that's been the foundation of our measure, and we found it to be reliable over the years.
Let me ask you. So if I'm a client or a prospective client of yours, I call you, it's like, listen, I know that neuroscience and psychology, this whole thing, I don't really, behavioral science, I'm not sure exactly, but I know I was at a conference where this guy won this award, this podcast award, and I heard about
we don't want to use him.
A meteoric celebrity was made on the back of all of this.
We can't afford him, probably. So what would you tell them? Like, what do you, I want to make sure my audience is very clear on what deliverable, what do you provide them? I know you're collecting information, but why would anyone want to have collected information? Like, what can you do for that company?
Yeah, the way I put this, and I think you'd probably agree with this, Will. I mean, at the end of the day, and I use this kind of sort of demonstration. Look, if you have $1 to spend, you need to know where to spend it. If you have $2, here's what to do. If you have $3, here's where to spend them. And don't ask anymore, because nobody has more than $3 to spend, from a activation standpoint, like out in the real world of marketing activation, like, putting together programs, putting things on Instagram and things. So that's at the end of the day, what we're doing is saying, look, what are the 1, 2, 3 priorities in terms of to reach the right people with the right message at the right time in the right place, which sounds so daunting. But that's essentially what all that, all those $10 words, all this psychological profiling, all the things you and I are talking about, diagnosing that lets us then say, here's the one most important thing to do. Here's the audience that's most gettable. Here's the way in which they're shopping, which means don't bother with a bunch of digital path to purchase. You need to get them here. And here's the type of content. I was just talking with someone this morning. She was like, look, digital content is still the wild, wild west. Nobody knows. Nobody has everybody's got kind of best practices, but they're kind of generic. We're getting a step deeper than that to say, look, you need to be in this space and target this audience, but the way you're doing it is all wrong. You need to pivot your content to be much more video centric, or much more, whatever the psych profile dictates, so that the team can go and, it's the old cliche, actionable insights. And so at the end of the day, we've had big clients say, look, this is the most actionable stuff we've ever gotten. And to me, that's the pass fail for our work, and all the other mumbo jumbo and psychobabble and all that stuff. And, Will, you and I talk about this so much. It's all for nothing if it doesn't get to that. I know what to do with it, and it puts butts in seats.
Yep.
So I have a question for both of you guys. Do you think that your industry, or your niche of the neuro behavioral science, is becoming more sought after, or do you think this digital world that's exploded with social media and being able to, when you were talking, Hunter, I was thinking the way that we can get insights now is by observing people's digital behavior, and that gives us more data, and which proves out more. So do you think that your industry has been as a product of this digital data we're now able to measure?
Well, you look like you have. Did you have something?
It's a great question. I wonder if we were just talking about talking to our own bubble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I would say that as it relates to my industry, my clients, I see more and more growth in behavioral science because marketers are being held accountable to every dollar.
Yeah.
And
right.
so because of that, there's a lot more emphasis of I can't constantly A/B test my way into something that works.
Yeah.
Or until something works. So I need to have a model. So I would say in a way that's growing. At the same time, Hunter, I know that many more, and my belief that many more companies out there are still just using A/B testing. They're just using behavioral data. They don't really know why, but they learned, oh wow, the blue button seems to work better than the red button. So let's go with blue. And then what they'll do, Steve, is they'll use blue for a while. Then blue may change. Blue doesn't work so much anymore. And they're like, let's go with green. Let's try green versus blue.
Yeah.
And so they test their way into it. So I would say they're both growing. My guess, Hunter, I'm not a millionaire, so it makes me believe that probably the other side is growing more. Mm-hmm. However, I'd also say that as these sciences become more popular in culture, the desire to understand why blue worked maybe better than green, that's a really bad analogy, but why these things matter are going to, or why these things work are going to matter more. But right now it's just so cheap to test your way out of stuff. Like Amazon does, I'm sure, thousands and thousands of tests every day, and they don't really care. I've had talks, and they don't really care as much about why. Why do I care about why? I can test my way out of it very quickly within an hour to know. So that's my thinking. I don't know. What do you think?
I agree, and Steve, I think they're kind of parallel. I don't think that the former of like big data, let's call it, has begotten this. In fact, I see kind of what Will and I are doing in competition with kind of that world to a large degree. And the analogy for me is it's like, the plumbing's not really working. We don't really, our results our category, our brands are flat or growing half a point a year. It's not working. So let's run a lot more water through those pipes, and it's sort of like, and that's kind of my origin story in my career. I'm like, we don't really know, and it's not really working. So let's do it on a cell phone or on a smartphone. It's like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't pass the sniff test. I see that happening a lot in big data. It's like, there's a lot of, and I think what happens maybe when it doesn't go well, either for groups like Will and I, or for that side, is when a team kind of goes, this will be our deliverance. Like, we'll do this one thing and that'll be, the big explanation. I think people can be disappointed when they run more water through the pipes. And we've done a lot of like AI stuff in our early days, running a lot of water through pipes. You get the same answers. You just have 96% confidence instead of 94 because you ran, millions of records through it. So, just more, exactly as Will said, doesn't tell you why. We've done a lot of collaborations with like big panels and things where they'll say, yeah, we know what, and then we're able to measure and say, well, here's why. And more importantly, here's how to accelerate that and do more of it. And so I totally agree with you, Will. I think that our side of the world should be integrated with that side, if nothing else, because unless you have a diagnostic, just more is just more. And for Amazon, yeah, you're right. They've got the scale that who cares? We can, manage second to second. But for insights and strategy teams, they don't have that level of, they've got to be looking 18 months out. And that's really not how Amazon's running.
I want to say something about Amazon. They own that platform. Mm-hmm. So they could be manipulating results just based on.
Even inadvertently, unbeknownst to them.
Absolutely.
So Hunter, we got people from all over, different walks of life. We have small businesses on this podcast, in this show. We have brands, we have researchers. Mm-hmm. So some people have differing levels of, experience with what we're talking about in sciences. So some of the things I like to just ask, just to kind of get everybody kind of, into the umbrella of behavioral sciences, is just like, what would you say is the most interesting thing that you've learned about behavioral science? And that could be towards business or just in general. So people go, God, that's so interesting. I didn't know that. This is for kind of the people that just started their behavioral science journey.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to it's model based. So in that same discussion with Siggy, I described how we do at the time, how we did market research, go collect a lot of data, bring it back to the ranch and model it, try to explain it and interpret it. And he said, oh, you're working model free. And I kind of went, I am. And he said, in academia, everything's model based. We use an existing framework that we know to be true, or at least we know, is somewhat reliable. And we go out and collect data and map it back to that, and I think, well, that's the mind states that you're mapping back to. For us, it's those drivers, those 4 drivers I talked about, and these barriers. And in other words, we know what we're looking for. Model free research, you go out and go, let's just ask a ton of questions. And that's kind of what the big data thing is. We don't know what we're looking for, but surely the answer is in here. So let's just plow through it. That's model free. Model based is going out, with a map, so to speak, and collecting to it. And I'll just give you an example. The most interesting thing of late, to me, we've been reporting a lot of stuff on this inflationary pricing. Everybody's talking about inflation like consumers are CPAs. Like, oh, the price of food went up 14.2%. Let me just open my QuickBooks here and I'll make some adjustments and I'll be trading down to store brands on these 5 categories. That's not the case. What we're seeing, and even with the lowest income consumers, people are having a much more emotional, irrational reaction. And it makes sense. I mean, I give the analogies, like, think when something bad happens in your life. Do you open a spreadsheet and pull up your household budget? No, you lose sleep. You get a knot in your stomach. You freak out. You blow it out of proportion. People react to stress in very emotional ways. We know it as human beings. What's beneficial, for us is we can then see it in our data, so that to the C-suite, you can go and say, look, $45,000 and under households are actually having the most emotional reaction to inflationary pricing. The way they're going to react is actually the opposite of what, in some categories, the opposite of what we thought. They're not just going to start trading down. They're actually going to kind of freak out and be like a kid on Friday night after payday. They're just going to kind of let the emotions take the helm. So I think, that's the most interesting thing to me, that you see these things that are really juxtaposed to what traditional insights might suggest. But then when you see them, it's the old adage of, when you see it, you know it to be true. And that's been the most rewarding part for me about this whole kind of neuro journey.
Let me build on the your idea you had said about the model. So I was just teaching a class two days ago, and I start off this whole idea about have a model. I don't care if it's my model. I like my model, but you got to have a model. Right. And here's what happened to me at a conference one time. I was sitting on stage with me, and then we had some other social scientists. At the very end of this panel discussion was a cultural anthropologist. Mm-hmm. And she was talking on stage about the importance of not having a model and just basically observing. And I remember I'm listening. I'm like, okay. And she made this example. She said, well, we're doing work with diabetes. And, we were just going through their kitchen. We weren't asking a lot of things. We're just going through their life. We just wanted to explore, and people are getting excited. And they go, and we went in the refrigerator and we noticed that the insulin was hidden. It was behind some things, right? Mm-hmm. And so she said that was so important for us to learn, because, oh my gosh, we saw that insulin. We knew that there must be maybe some shame involved. Like she didn't want other people to see this insulin. Mm-hmm. And so she made this to sound very good, like this powerful thing that she was able to get because she didn't have a model. Yeah. I then raised my hand and said, but what if you didn't see that hidden? Yeah. You lost the insight. You lost it. So you're hoping that you get something that's exciting and inspirational and insight. And I said, and I looked in the audience, I go, I guarantee you will get 4 things out of any piece of research I have. It's the 4 components of my model. You will get those things. You know what you're getting. And if I don't get those things, I have not delivered for you. And because I believe that model is so important for me to take it to the next step, which would be application. And there was a little tension on there because I was basically saying, like, I don't want to. And I looked at I'm like, you guys pay me. And I'm not just going to hope that I get something interesting for you. Like, I'm going to give you this. But I think that's the reasoning behind a model, is that I know what I'm trying to look for. And I think the biggest part of that model idea is that if I put something into market and it is not working, I can then go back to my model and figure out what part of my model is broken. Yeah. And is it always going to work? No, it's not. But I have something to go back to. If I know that blue used to work and now blue doesn't work anymore, if I don't have a model to know which my next color or what's my next button, what do? I just come up with things. That's my issue. That's why important I think of a model. It's not because the model is better. It's that the model allows you structure for you to do better testing.
It's objective. It's objective because you would have seen that. Not to dance all over the example of this poor anthropologist, but I have been seeing more of that narrative creeping into the narrative, like on LinkedIn, more of model free, and I think it's dangerous. So I agree with you because you could have opened that fridge and got, oh, she's embarrassed. You don't know that. She could have been embarrassed. She could be non-compliant, which is super prevalent in diabetes care, which is super weird, but it happens. Yeah. She could think she could have it there because every day she takes out the milk and it'll remind her to take the insulin. You don't know why. You have inadvertently put all sorts of collective memory and subjectivity on that observation that a model would have prevented. So I think that's a great example of one. And ever since I started working model-based, that's been it's been so much more rewarding. And it's because you have a touchstone. You don't have to say, well, am I right? Or am I projecting myself onto that? That is very liberating. And you know that it's like decades and decades of academic knowledge that you're standing on. It's not just a model you made up this morning.
Yep, totally.
You don't know this about me, Will, but I was a model in Japan for a while.
I always wasabi. Were you the wasabi? An important wasabi model?
I was the face of fake wasabi in Japan.
I was the catalog model, so I'm relating with you guys. I think and I'm wondering, when you say you have to have models, you lean towards blonde, brunette.
Yeah. As long as there's structure, that's all I care. That's all I care about. That's all I care about. Hey, so let me ask you, Connor. Getting away from the Japanese element of our show today. So what would you say? We are in a new industry. We are taking decades worth of habits and rituals in the marketing research field and the branding field, and we're throwing it on its head sometimes. We're totally looking at the world differently, and that causes some tension. So what's like the most, maybe the hardest part of applying your model to brands, like in that, to make them more receptive to your ideas and actually apply what you're trying to do ultimately? What's the hardest thing about that for you?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of our journey has been, and we've gotten better and better at it, even in the past year, and with every, even in the past weeks. We used to talk too much about the science, and it was hard for teams to sit still. I don't know if you know Kim Orton, Will, but she had a great quote a couple of years ago. She said, "Is it that the team doesn't understand it, or is it they won't sit still long enough to understand it?" It's a good point. And when we got too much into the science, and I think I probably did it a little bit at the top of this discussion. You were kind of like, "Okay, dude, so what are you doing? What do you deliver?" When you get too much into the back of the house in the science, it's interesting, but it's not important. We've gotten better and better and better at saying, look, here's what's going on in the world. It's sort of back to the old standards of storytelling. Who is it? What do we need them to do? And what are the three most important ways to get them to do it? So I think that's the biggest challenge is to bring this forth in a way that they don't, that a team at a manufacturer, for example, doesn't have to learn a new taxonomy, but you bring them in enough that they understand and believe it and can kind of make it their own. Then quickly get to all right, what do we do about it? I think that's always kind of the challenge of bringing forth something new like this, because when you see it at the end of the day, it makes a lot of sense. It actually is simple, but trying to help people internalize it is a real balancing act. I don't know if that's similar to what you've experienced.
Yeah, no, it's exactly. And I've hurt my business over the years because I try to overcomplicate it because I want to make sure my customers know how smart I am. Mm-hmm. So I use big words. And even though everything I learn about behavioral science is say, simplify, simplify, simplify. Here's even recently, I don't know if you've heard this. I was on a podcast with one of the largest insights VPs or insights leaders of probably a Fortune 50 company.
An award-winning podcast like
ours?
Just a regular.
Can you use your new mic while you tell the story?
I know, I probably should have. I should have used the new mic.
Your useful award.
And what he said to me was, he started off the conversation, and he was the head of insights, and he says, "Explain to me what behavioral science is, because none of us really know what that means."
Yeah.
And in my head, Hunter, I thought, whoa, head of insights knows me. I'm going to be on the podcast, but basically he was telling his group, we need to have a nomenclature that we can kind of wrap our heads around, because behavioral science is very scary. Neuroscience is very scary. I'm not a neuroscientist, things like that. Yeah. And so I actually started toying around with this idea of just saying emotional research, which the scientist in me makes me upset about that, because I think it's so much deeper and more, but to our customer, they get that. Like, oh, I know I need to be more emotional. I got that. They feel that, but it's a hard tension, because I know there's so much more that I should be saying, but our customers don't care what I know. They care about what their desires are, what their motivations are, what they're trying to do in their own little story. And I'm just a component of that. So when I came in with big terms, I've literally had clients say, stop using that term heuristics, literally saying, because when you say that, you lose my audience and it's hurting me as a marketing researcher. Don't use those words. I'm like, but I won't use the person's name, but no, but she's like, you got to stop. I know, and I know that, but they don't need to know that.
I've got very similar stories. I mean, I'll tell you, one of the things that's been a breakthrough for us over the past couple of years is saying, look, when we deliver, we call them a playbook. I mean, look, we're delivering a PowerPoint playbook that someone can take and use at the end of the day. We said, look, this person needs to be able to explain what it says without having it in their hand. They should be able to explain what the study revealed, to their boss. It's the old elevator speech. This is nothing new, but looking at our stuff and going, I mean, candidly, is that true of this playbook? It has changed the way it is simplified the way we do it dramatically. So some of the business fundamentals are still there. And I think part of it we talked about that first meeting to today, we both got a lot more confidence. We've got a lot more case studies. We've got a lot more success stories, notches on our belt. And it's, it leads to a little more confidence that, look, if you want to know more, you can. One another big change or shift we've kind of gone through is if they want to know more, they'll ask. Give them a chance to ask. I used to you'll show up and throw up. I'd show up and be like, I'm going to tell you all about, we called them the 9 whys, the 4 drivers, the 5 barriers. And by the time anybody got to ask a question, they were like, oh God, 4 years of psychology training in 20 minutes. You don't have to do that. And that's been a big learning for us. And you're right. Behavioral, it's a principle that we were broke for the first 5 years.
Yep. I'm listening to you guys and I'm thinking, I got to run a Facebook ad for a client. And it's like his budget's on the line. Mm-hmm. We're going to do some testing. Some of it's going to be wasted. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I'm wondering, I was like, gosh, how nice would it be to figure out what's just going to hit a home run every time?
Yeah.
It's an aspirational thing, but how would someone I just need this to work on this ad?
Yeah. And it's sort of, well, what are you measuring? So if you go out and do testing, what you're looking for. A model-based way is to go and say, we do this. You're kind of talking about how we applied it to our business. We do that. We say, look, we're going to run a real rational ad with like a stat. We're going to run a real tribal ad, like 90% of our clients come back, sort of tribal wisdom. We're going to run a real experiential ad that's like, has Siggy talking about the framework. And we're going to run a real, what we call alpha E or instinctual ad. You will drive an average of X, 10% improvement over competitors. And then when we see how they perform, it tells us something about our audience. We know which one won and we know why, so we can make more of them for that audience. That's exactly what we're doing for our customers too.
I think a core component of Steve, of what you brought out too, is what is the behavior that you're looking for. So if you want more likes and shares, then that could be something that's a very different ad than if I want more conversions. So I just talked about this in a recent video, this idea that we tend to believe, and we've thought about this as an industry for the last 50 years, that if people like my ad, they'll buy something. If you like my ad, you'll buy something. It just makes total sense. Oh, if you like my ad, then you'll feel good about me and I'll buy. That's not how it actually works.
Yeah.
We don't buy things because we like them. We like things because we buy them. Mm-hmm. So the biggest point I always look at the world, and this is what lens I look at the world, is that should you make likable ads and funny ads, things like that? Sure. I say that with my hands up. Sure. It's nice. What I'm more interested in is, has my ad activated some sort of a positive association that you have with a brand? And if that was a good experience last time they used you, that you're going like, oh my gosh, this brand helps me meet my goals. We talk about it in my book, right? It helps me reach my aspirational goals. That if that ad confirms or reminds me that product can help me reach my aspirational goals, I'm feeling better about that ad. if I just have a funny little, and I know a lot of people do, they look at pictures on a Facebook ad, and you want to go with the craziest picture ever, because really what you're looking for is the click. And that's arguably okay, because maybe I can get you to stop the browsing. I want to find that crazy picture that also not only gets you to stop swiping or kind of scrolling, but also says, oh my gosh, there's something about this that connects with me. And so I fall into this trap on my own company by a crazy ad with maybe a baby on it, thinking, oh my God, I got a bunch of stops. I got a bunch of people that clicked on my link and I got no sales. Yeah. That did nothing for my business, but it cost me a lot of money because Facebook ads have gone up 80% in the last year, basically. Yeah. So it cost me a lot of money. I got a lot of cool metrics that makes me feel good about, oh man, I got a bunch of people clicks, but I got no sales from it. That's because I fall into the trap myself, right? Of forgetting what is the real behavior I'm trying to get. Yeah. And sometimes it is click. Sometimes it is emotion. So I can create that association. That's awesome. And other times, especially on a platform like that, I want you to convert. And so I want to be a little bit different in the pictures I use as well as the copy.
Yeah. Well, I think, Mike McCunis, the former legend of Kellogg Insights and now professor at Michigan State. And I was doing a discussion like this with him the other day. And, he had a great reminder that, look, the fundamentals, whether you're doing big data or neuro or whatever, who do we want to do what is still a really important assessment. And, it's not always the answers, it's the question. And I think that's where sometimes the big data world of how do we grow the business can lead you into a lot of just kind of, searching and data mashing. But until you know who you want to do what, it's very difficult to
sometimes really the hardest question you ask, it's not the customer, it's who your client is saying, tell me your objectives. Exactly. That is one of the hardest, because sometimes brands like, I want to grow. I'm like, boy, I can grow you in a lot of ways, man. We can charge more.
What's the most efficient?
There's all sorts of things we can do. You got to give me more than that, but that's really hard because a lot of a lot of marketers, arguably, they just know they need growth. Like, I need growth. And so, but those are hard questions to ask, but they're important questions to have.
And I think the model-based piece really helps, because again, you're not working with, it's the old flip over the chart pad. That is the most paralyzing specter, in any boardroom. And yet it's the starting point of most like insights and strategy projects. Let's flip it over. It's actually not how the natural creative process works at all. Our brains need reference points. They need you hear in the ad agency world, the luxury of a tight brief. The more constrained we can help, an organization be, actually the more creative and the more we'll discover. And that's another huge part of the model. We have something to start with. We can say, look, let's at least use this to frame up what we know, what we don't know. And that helps a lot.
Yep. How often do you guys find that you do this great research, you bring this great stuff, but I think of that scene in Mr. Mom, the schooner tuna presentation, right? Where she's the enemy of a great ad is the one that's going to sign off on it. And they're always looking at it from their perspective. Mm-hmm. How do your model gives you some leverage there?
It does. I'll give you an example. And it happens still, even to this day, even after they buy our research, it happens to where some people they don't go forward with recommendations. I'll tell you a time where it worked out really well. I was asked to go into a meeting with the CMO of La Quinta. They've been since bought out. And the agency hired me to come in, who did this advertisement work. And they said, can you just help explain how we got here? Because we're working together. Mm-hmm. So I went in there and I brought out my little, you guys have a playbook. We have a Mindstate blueprint. So we have an activation blueprint. And I looked at the advertisement. I explained what those ads were doing from a behavioral science perspective.
Yeah.
She went like, she was so into the conversation, Steve, right? She was like, oh my God, I totally see why we have multiple people in the background. We're talking about checking in some of the ads and why we chose some things. She said at the very end, she was like, this was the best creative discussion I've had since working here. So she leaves. And then the creative director looks at me, he's like, we showed her the same campaign 2 weeks ago and she shit all over it. And he goes, what happened? I was like, and so we were laughing a bit because I love this guy, but I said, it's because I had a model that I put the ad through. and it made it feel more scientific. So we weren't having a subjective conversation around, oh, does she look like my brand lover or not? Those are important conversations to have.
Yep.
But she was interested in this. She felt like there was more objectivity in the decisions that Steve was making, the other Steve. And so in that, he was like, I was like, here's what we can do for you is we allow you to go into conversations where you did something because your intuition told you to do it. But I can wrap it around a behavioral science principle, and it sounds better coming from me because I have a scientific word for what you knew to do automatically. Yep. And so it works really well. The problem is those conversations don't happen enough with the CMO. It's always somebody else. And they go, you know what? I already told my boss that I was going to go down this path. You told me not to go down that path. You need to leave the room, right? Like, it goes nowhere. And it still happens to this day a lot, as a matter of fact. I would say it happens quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, the organization's got to believe in the, in the framework. They've got to believe in the data. I mean, we've been doing a lot of work on how we show the data that, conveys confidence without you having to learn SPSS. So, we've learned a lot in that regard. But I think you're exactly right. What that marketing director, the experience she had was the same one I had. It's like, God, this feels good. I can explain and do this in a more scientific way rather than sitting here with a board that someone says is good and it's all on me. And if it fails, I don't know, I guess because my opinion and my intuition's bad. It's very liberating to have exactly an objective framework through which to put something.
Yep.
So I got to ask this question, Hunter. So you talked about the 4 drivers.
Mm-hmm.
Why is your company Alpha Diver?
It's a good question. We have internal shorthand for those 4 drivers. We call it expert, triber, diver, alpha. The most pre-conscious of the ones, and those are Siggy's words. Those are like the neuroscience back of the house words. The most pre-conscious of them, the most system 1, are the alpha and the diver. I've talked about them as the experiential or the instinctual. So we were ready to, what's that?
Boom.
Yeah. So we were ready for a refresh. It happened to be 2020, but we were moving in a new direction, much more around this database, much more around this quantitative measure. We used to do a lot of longitudinal ethnography, a lot of digital ethnography, and we've really evolved into this much more quantitative space. And we were just ready for a refresh. So we said, what's something that only we could call ourselves? And that hence Alpha Diver. Often referred to as Alpha Driver, which is okay. I've embraced it as the Chipotle effect, and there is some, perhaps I'm talking to myself, but there is some value and there's some cognitive little hacks that happen when someone has to sort of relearn the name and be corrected. And so anyway, many call it Alpha Driver, but it is in fact Alpha Diver, and that's the origin of it.
Nothing wrong with that.
The award-winning, the award-winning Mindstate Marketing Hour. I have to cognitively reframe this now.
This is why we win awards. Conversations like this, Steve. This is why we win awards. This is why we get people to listen to the show. So
this has been excellent. Is this a stopping point, or do you got another home run question, Will?
Let's just always. I think it's a good start. Just like Hunter said, we could probably keep this show going for 3 hours easily. But I think the big point here that I want to take away with all these conversations is that if you're out there and you're trying to improve your business, whether you're a small business, whether you're a researcher out there, you're a brand manager, whoever you are, behavioral science and neuroscience, these things matter. They matter a lot. And I hope that you took away a couple of nuggets. So actually, let's do 2. Let's do 2 questions. And these are I'm not going to answer. Hunter, these are for you. Okay. The first one, let's talk about nuggets here. What is maybe that 1 or 2 nuggets, anything you can do to help a listener apply or bring neuroscience benefits to their business outside of saying go with a model, because we've hit that already.
Yeah, look, I'll double click on that. Look at the challenge, look at your brand, look at, e-com versus bricks, whatever you're trying to figure out, and say, is it rational? Is it social? Meaning, are they following the wisdom of the tribe, the wisdom of the crowd, deferring to others? Is it experiential, all about discovering and exploring new, or is it to go out and win? One of those 4 will be explanatory of at least a cohort, a segment's behavior. So use that as a foundational question to ask, and it will at least move the ball down the field to help you potentially, even if it just helps you realize some things. Why did she hide that insulin? Because the back of the fridge is colder, because that's where her, her sister-in-law keeps her insulin, or because she's embarrassed about it, because, when she pulls the milk out, it reminds her, or, the win is actually probably the embarrassment one. Is it back there because her daughter's insulin's in the front and she doesn't want her to get it? Point being, using the model will help you assess that. So do that.
Great job.
You going to ask the next question, or you?
I got one. It was just this is the one where, like, how do people learn more about you, Hunter? They want to know, like, okay, I want to learn more about Alpha Diver and what Hunter's doing. How do people learn more about you? And then Steve, you can bring something back in if you need to.
Yeah, of course, our website, Alpha-Diver, is good. But really, I would encourage more to connect with me and follow on LinkedIn. I've become so much more prolific posting stuff, sharing a ton of stuff from our database. So just if you go to find me on LinkedIn, that's where there'll be a lot of back and forth. And I'm sure both of our stuff will continue to commingle there.
It will.
So, all right, a solar company. Does the client want to win? Does the client want the experience? What of those four does the person that wants to put solar on their house, what do they want?
Everybody thinks it's the first one. Everybody thinks it's rational. It's good for the environment. It saves money on bills. It very well may be tribal. If you live in a row of 5 houses and you're the only one without it, you're not trying to keep up with the Joneses, but you're going, hey, look, he's got a similar job to me. She's got a similar job. They've got similar households. They've determined it to be the right move. Yeah, that's good data. I'm going to make a decision based on that. That very well could be the reason they get solar. The experiential is probably it feels good. I'm progressive. I'm somebody, it lets me feel good about, supporting the environment. Tesla gets a lot of flack for this. It's like, really, a Tesla is not the greenest thing you could do. It really net for the environment, but there's a lot of experiential components. And then last but not least, rich people have solar panels on their house. It's cool. It's status. It's, do you have just regular solar panels, or do you have the new Elon Musk solar panels? There's a lot of status that can go with it. When you think about it that way, any of those four are plausible. You may not be able to go, oh, it's that one, but it very well may not be, because it'll lower your energy bills and it's good for the environment. Those other four are just as likely. And that's a great example of kind of using those 4 principles to at least, move the discussion forward.
Have a hypothesis, yeah.
Excellent. I love that. And it may be different in parts of the country as well.
Truth, yeah. Absolutely.
We got some dancing music. Will likes to dance. I think that to become an award-winning podcast, you got to be able to dance.
That award was incredible. He went all the way across the stage. It's great.
Yeah, I know. He likes to play dope beats so we can dance. Thank you, Steve.
And you weren't even there. And it's called Feeding the Ducks.
Feeding the Ducks. I love.
You want to get this on your playlist? It's called Feeding the Ducks. It's the Mindstate Marketing award-winning playlist, Feeding the Ducks. Will, you got any thing if folks have been listening, they just can't stand it anymore, they need to reach out, they need to tap your wisdom for their situation, what do you want them to do?
Yep, I have a great website with tons of resources at the mindstategroup.com. You can either go to the resources tab, and I have videos out there. I have copies of blueprints. Have lots of blog articles. I have up to 50 or 60. But also there's these big red buttons there, Steve, that will, if you click a red button, you can schedule time with me. And I will actually, if you want me to, look through your advertising, you and I together. And I'll just give you my perspective from a behavioral psychology perspective on what you're doing well and what maybe needs to be improved. So reach out. I'm pretty easy to talk to. I'm not going to criticize anybody. This is my passion. I'll bring my passion to you.
Hunter, if someone's like, oh my gosh, I got to meet this guy, what do they do?
Yeah, I'd go to alpha-diver.com, and same way, lots of content on our blog, lots of resources, and of course, interestingly enough, lots of red buttons where you can schedule time to chat with us and hear more.
I wonder if data was involved in the color of those buttons. Hey, if you need a producer, a co-host to help you produce an award-winning live stream podcast, be sure to get with me, Steve ROI Brown. I'm out there. There's like, Will, did you know there's more than 2 Steve Browns on LinkedIn.
I don't believe it.
That's why I had to put the ROI in there. My parents were smart. They gave me a name that I could spell real easy. So I had to add that middle to it. Folks, be sure to like here. I got the outro all set up. Will's trusty sidekick has created this. We're a podcast. Be sure to subscribe out there on Stitcher, Buzzsprout, iHeart, all those places that the cool kids do. And the Mindstate channel on YouTube. Watch. This is where you get to see us. You get to see what we look like. We don't just have sexy voices. We have sexy faces. All right, folks. Anything else?
Former Japanese model. He knows what he's talking about when he talks about being sexy. So view him on the live channel is the way to go. That's the way to go.
I had a little more hair back in the day and not just on my legs. So you guys have a great week.
Thanks, everybody.
See you next time. And I'm turning this off. So now it's the awkward smile time. Ready?
Thanks, Will.